Happy Wednesday, folks. Today is November the 6th, 2024. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandagis, and now we're talking about Hurricane Rafael. It strengthened to become our fifth major hurricane of the 2024 Atlantic season, right ahead of making landfall in western Cuba earlier today. Again, maxed out as a Cat 3. 115-mile-per-hour winds. Now, there are some shifts in the forecast track recently issued by the National Hurricane Center as it makes its way into the Gulf of Mexico, and this is favorable for a miss for the Gulf Coast of the United States. Good news, but we'll see if this holds because there's still a lot of uncertainty in that forecast track. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. Here's an 18-hour loop of satellite imagery, infrared satellite imagery, that shows a period of time like we talked about yesterday. There was a window opening on up for rapid intensification ahead of landfall in western Cuba, and that's exactly what happened here. If you wait till it loops one more time, right ahead of landfall, notice how an eye forms and develops there, and then it moves over land and begins to dissipate a little bit. At this hour, it is a Category 2 storm, 105-mile-per-hour winds, gusts up to 140 as it moves now to the north and west at 14 miles per hour and is entering the southeastern portions of the Gulf of Mexico at this time. Still, at the moment, favorable conditions for it to maintain at least a Category 2 hurricane status. Visible satellite imagery here, not very symmetrical. Most of the precipitation, heaviest rain, and also the strongest winds on the eastern, northeastern side of this. A little bit of some dry air, as you see it here, switching up on the imagery showing water vapor. A little more dry air on the western side of the storm system. And look what lurks to the northwest. A whole lot of dry air in the mid-levels over the central and western Gulf of Mexico, and that will come into play in terms of its intensification in its track going forward. Still has plenty of very warm sea surface waters to work with here. Not as warm as it was in the Caribbean when we were looking at 90-degree water temperatures, but we are still in the mid to upper 80s, and that's sufficient. All you need is 78, 79, 80-degree waters or warmer to facilitate the heat transfer that these storms use for energy and intensification purposes. But notice the track here, that's a little bit of a signal on where it may be going. So here it is currently emerging in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico at this time as a Category 2, maintaining that status right up through the end of the work week. Right up through Friday, it weakens down to 100-mile-per-hour Category 2. And then notice this massive lobe here at the tail end of its forecast track. This tends to show up in these cones when there is a lot more uncertainty and the overall steering patterns really begin to break down. Forward motion slows, which is why you see these timestamps so close together here. It's slowing down its movement off towards the west and eventually weakening as well. As we get to early next week, Monday afternoon, we're barely a tropical storm at this point as it's encountering that dry air, as I just showed you, and also increasing mid-levels and upper-level wind shear, kind of tilting it and tearing it apart there. So it should be on a weakening trend. And also, big takeaway here is the huge difference from this cone of yesterday, when this was leaning towards the west, northwest, and then a northerly track as it weakened, but lift towards the north, towards the coast, Gulf Coast of Louisiana. Yesterday's track. This is different, staying off to the west now, favoring more of what the European has been indicating for the past few days. GFS was trending more to the north. And that's not set in stone. There are still two very distinguishable camps of computer models. We've got one that still leans towards the west and then loops its way to the north. So there still are a fair amount of models that do lean that way. And then there's also just as many, if not a few more, that take it farther to the west and maybe even drift it to the southwest eventually as it's on that weakening trend, which is why that lobe here is so large, because the uncertainty and the divergence is so vast. There could be any sort of different tracks that happen here as we get towards day 3 or so in the forecast after we get past later this week. So let's compare the longer range of global models again. Still in good agreement here, the American and GFS right up through the end of the week, just like you saw with the forecast cone, pretty much in line with each other. And then as we get into the weekend, we start to see the divergence emerge here. GFS begins to lean more to the north, the American. European stays to the south and eventually to the west, and that plays out perfectly here, like we just saw with the spaghetti plots. GFS weakening, building towards the Gulf Coast of the U.S. Likely at this point, maybe a tropical depression, maybe a lower-end tropical storm. Meanwhile, European keeps it stronger, but drifts to the south and west, and at this point in time, getting into the Bay of Campeche as we head towards early next week. And from there, both show weakening, maybe a landfall in Mexico, according to the European. GFS likely not even making it on land as things look right now. So those are encouraging trends in terms of a miss in terms of landfall. Of course, it already did bring landfall and impacts to western Cuba. But after that, things are looking a little bit better for a potential U.S. hit. All right, elsewhere in the Atlantic, we do have one other tropical wave we're watching. A low chance, 20-30% risk of our next named system, which would be Sarah. That would be next on the list there. But again, we are filling in this list rather quickly. Only 4 names left to go before we go into the auxiliary list if we were to need that. Pretty unlikely we see 4 more named storms with only 3 weeks left of the hurricane season, but wouldn't be the weirdest thing I've seen in weather. So that's the latest in today's update on Hurricane Rafael. It'll remain a hurricane for the next few days. I'll have an update for you again tomorrow, but you can find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and on TikTok. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.